just what I was gonna do. If I live one more year, I'm packing my bags.
Man, Benny, I want to once again, I know every week, but every week you surpass last week's introduction. The town I live in is lonely. Immediately took me back to my old Logan Heights days working patrol in the barrio. And I'm sure, Chalo, it took you back to Calesia.
It took me back to my retirement party.
San Isidro. I mean, it took us back, way back, that song, man. Beautiful song, Benny. Te aventaste, de veras.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Chalo had to sing that song during his
retirement party.
Oh, did you really?
I didn't even know they were gonna do that. They just started playing. It goes, here's a mic. They started playing. It's all right, bro. And I was like, oh my god, dude. Ben recorded it.
He was HBD and crying.
I was HBD, so.
And crying.
I'm sure you were. Yes. Hey guys, listen. Today, I know Benny, you're going to do the introductions, but listen to me. I'm excited. We have two legends on our show, and I'm not going to introduce them. You could see them; they've been on our show before. But I believe, and I'm sure they're going to correct me when we start asking questions. I don't think they both have ever been on the screen together, other than testifying in court. I don't think through a podcast. And I'm telling you, we're breaking records having these two legends. But I'm going to let you talk about them, Benny. But before we do, we have a couple of memorials we want to talk about and a couple of quick shout outs. And then I can't wait to hear our guests. They're my heroes. They're our legends in law enforcement. First of all, Sean, it's all yours, brother. Here you go.
Thanks, man. I just want to memorialize Richie Hines. Great guy. Worked with him out in Southeastern Division. He finally lost his battle with cancer this week. And our prayers go out to his daughters, Alana and Janelle. And another shout out, former sergeant of mine, Rich Nimitz, another great guy. He took care of me on an incident when I worked for him at Eastern Division. And then he was one of my watch commander sergeants when I was a field lieutenant. And our thoughts and prayers go out to everyone's family and whatnot. And last thing about Rich, hey, rest in peace, Muskrat.
Okay, rest in peace, my brother. He was also one of my sergeants, outstanding guy. Guys, before I forget, please log in to policeandfirepublishing.com. Our book, When the Music Stops, the Pain Begins, written by 3 highly decorated police officers. 2, at least I know, not myself, but 2 highly decorated police officers. I'm telling you, every police officer, once you read this book, needs to have a copy of this book. It's an outstanding book. You could buy it right now, Police and Fire Publishing. We're going to be having conferences in the near future. I'm telling you, if you know a police officer, you know somebody that is going through the academy, or a retired police officer or dispatcher, they need this. They need this book. Or correctional officer, they need this book. Outstanding book. With that said, I have one more shout out. Throttle and Thrive is a home in Palos Verdes, California. It's an in-house facility for first responders and firefighters. It's a program where you stay there, you live there for a month, you go through counseling, you go through therapies, And most of all, it's a Christian-based facility. If you know a police officer that needs help, we're going to have the director, Siobhan Thompson, on our show, I believe, on December 26th. But right now, they have 6 beds available. So if you know somebody that is suffering through addiction, PTSD, that is suffering right now as a police officer or firefighter, please, I'll put their phone number up. I know you can't see it here. Please give her a call. They have 6 beds available right now, and it's free of charge. Insurances or police departments will cover the cost. With that said, Benny, it's all yours, brother.
Okay, so today we have CDC SSU Special Agents Brian Perry and Devin Hawks. Both men are considered the best within the Department of Corrections, especially in the Special Services Unit community of the department.
You can have it.
Both men are top when investigating prison
I
gangs,
cut it. You can have
prison gang members, and interviewing those who have decided to drop out or debrief. Today's podcast will focus on the debriefing process, what is involved, the security of the individual dropping out, and debriefing. We're also going to hear about what made him drop out, what made him get out of the gang. We're going to discuss the mindset of that individual through the eyes of these 2 experts who have conducted those debriefs. Now it's time to welcome our special guests to the gray line, the story behind the blue line. Let's welcome Brian and Devin. Thank you for coming on, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
So my first question is going to be to Brian. Let's start with Brian. Brian, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? When did you start and the positions you held while with the Department of Corrections? Tell us how many you have actually debriefed.
I started in 1972. I was a parole agent in East Los Angeles and South Central Los Angeles, home of the Crips and Bloods. East LA was home of the Mexican Mafia. I later went on to SSU and worked the same area for a total of, I had 14 years with SSU on the street, 10 years as a parole agent. So I had about 24, 25 years working the streets of LA. I later went to Sacramento. I took the appointment as an assistant director. Before that, I was chief of investigations. Then I spent 7 years as the assistant director. I retired in 2002 and went on to a 20-year career as a consultant with a number of agencies, state and federal.
Wow.
Go ahead, Benny.
Okay, our next one is going to be with Devin. Devin, it's your turn. Please tell our audience when you started and your positions with the Department of Corrections. Can you tell us how many individuals you have debriefed?
Hey, Devin, before you get started, it sounds like it's your microphone. Is somebody watching nearby the show live? If it is, we're getting a little bit of feedback. Can you just double check, or do you have a phone nearby that might be the podcast is on? Because we're getting feedback from your phone.
Yeah, I don't have my phone nearby. I have it in the other room with my wife.
Okay, is she watching the show live by any chance?
No.
No? Okay, all right, perfect. Oh, yeah, for whatever reason, getting feedback. Go ahead and answer the question.
Okay, I started in 1984 with the Department of Corrections at California Men's Colony. I started working in the gang unit in 1986. Went up to Pelican Bay in 1989 and started right away with the gang unit there, working with Lieutenant Brittle as his assistant. From there, I became a sergeant a year later. After 2 months as a sergeant, I got brought back into the gang unit. Finished working there, and then went to be a counselor, caseworker. Actually, my assignment was to the debrief unit, and I did that. Also with 2 special assignments that I went back to the gang unit as a caseworker. From there, I went down to headquarters in classification services, working special project section. During that time, I also was asked by the transportation unit to provide gang training to each of the transportation hubs, the people who do all the transportation of prisoners between institutions. And then Mr. Perry, as the assistant director, he hired me to work as a special agent in Special Service Unit, gang intelligence operations. And in 2004, I went back to Pelican Bay. The warden created a position for me called gang specialist. While I was there supporting the gang unit, Mr. Perry approached me again about going back to work in Washington, D.C. for the National Gang Intelligence Center. And I did that for a little over a year. And then in 2010, I went down to Dual Vocational Institution and finished out my career there, retired a year later.
Go ahead, Chalo.
Wow, man, that's a lot of experience. A lot of experience. Hey, this question is for Brian. Our show today is on the debriefing process. Okay, the debrief process. What do you think about the debriefing process? What's your take on that?
Well, I started doing debriefings before we called them debriefings, and before we had a real solid policy. We started out as confidential memorandums, but over time, when we came up with the validation process on identifying gang members officially, and then we needed a policy on how to handle people that wanted to defect from the gangs, and it evolved over time. I mean, the questions we asked, the format of the reporting, we learned so much, and it was a constantly evolving process, and it works. And a lot of inmates tell us after they go through it, it wasn't as hard or as difficult as they thought. So it's a necessary process. We learn a lot from these lengthy interviews with inmates, and we learn a lot of the reasons why they defect. So it's a good process, and it's constantly evolving, getting better. We learn we learn as we go.
It is next question. This is for Devin. Devin, what causes a gang member to drop out and debrief, and what makes them give away that power that they have within the prison?
Well, first, as far as the reason why they decide to drop out, reasons are many, probably as many as why a person even joins a gang. I could tell you some of the reasons they gave me that they left the gang. One I would hear a lot of is, I just got tired. Too much drama, too much violence, just too much. And they just were getting out. Another reason would be that they fell out of favor with the gang, became a target for assault. Another would be to just be in charge of their own life. Instead of someone else telling them what to do, to always make them traffic drugs or assault people. And if they don't do it, then they themselves could get assaulted. So just getting away from all that. Family and friends are also very influential in getting them to leave the gang. Some of them have a religious awakening or remorse for something that they've done. They want to be released from the segregated housing unit. By policy, at one time, we placed all prison gang members and associates in the security housing unit for an indeterminate period of time. And when they're in segregated housing, their privileges are restricted. They don't lose any of their rights, but as far as their privileges go, they don't get as much canteen. They don't get access to these big yards. They don't get to socialize as much, and they don't get as many packages. So the privileges are reduced. Even their visits are usually behind glass. So one of the reasons to get out is just to get out of segregation and be in a more open environment, get a work assignment that they can get credit and earn time off of their sentence. Probably another reason that I hear a lot is that they finally see the hypocrisy of the gang life. A Mexican mafia dropout asked me recently, do you know how many Mexican mafia members were killed by their rival, the Nuestra Familia? And then he answered, one, Cheyenne Cadena back in December 1972. And I thought about that, and I thought, how many Mexican mafia members and associates were killed by the Mexican mafia? And that's hundreds. How many Mexican mafia dropouts have been killed by the Mexican mafia? You could probably count it on one hand. So there's a greater opportunity for survival to get out of the game, to drop out. Now, there was a second question you asked me. What was
So the second question is what makes them give away or give out the power that they have within the prison when they debrief?
You mentioned power. That's kind of a funny word. I wouldn't call it power. What makes them give up the influence that they maybe had or whatever? I would say that they exchange that to empower themselves. They put themselves in the driver's seat. Kind of like that poem Invictus says, I'm the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul. They end up taking charge again of their lives and not having to do the bidding of somebody else.
Wow.
Go ahead, Big Sean.
You know what, guys? When I was the assistant director, I used to read 150 to 200 debriefs a year. And some of the reasons that I had heard was, and a lot of them, I kind of reiterate what Devin said, is they want out of crime, tired of the gang rules, want out of shoe, fear of the third strike if they weren't serving a life term, family more important than gang, want to do their own time and eventually parole if they can. Gang leaders use soldiers for personal gain, found religion, and realization that the assaults they carried out were for the wrong reasons. So anyway, that I used to keep a running log of every one that I read. So
Hey Brian, do you think they get tired of the politics? I mean, there's a lot of politics, right? In being in a gang, just like being in whatever you're at, it's politics, politics, politics.
And it's dirty politics, just like the politicians today. And like one guy told us, he got tired of the mob fatigue. He said it was difficult being in a gang, and it was a lot easier to do your own time.
Hey, Brian, also there's other there's numerous reasons, but I think one of them, if you guys don't mind talking a little bit about, is where they're asked or tasked to kill one of their best friends, or they're getting ready to be released from 20 years of prison, and a week or a month before they're released, they're tasked to commit an assault. That's also another one of the many reasons why they decide to debrief. Is that one of the many reasons?
Yeah, absolutely. Well stated. Everybody wants to go home, and they know that if they got caught sticking somebody or got caught transferring a weapon from one place to another, that they were going to catch a case, and that case could be the third strike. So yeah, that's a well stated.
Perfect.
Wow.
Go ahead, Big Sean.
Yeah, this is for both of you guys. Hey, thanks again for coming back onto the show. I really appreciate it. What's the purpose of the debrief? And you guys have already danced around these questions already. What is the purpose of the debrief, and what is gained by the Department of Corrections and the individual by dropping out and debriefing?
Why don't you go ahead, Devin, take it first, and then I'll fill it in.
Okay. Well, you have the purpose from two sides. You have the purpose from the prisoner side, the gang member or associate. Usually the purpose is to be classified as a dropout. That offers all kinds of opportunities. One is to get to a general population, and another is to get to a yard where they're protected and away from some of these guys and the pressures that are upon them. For law enforcement, the purpose of debriefing, one of them is to gather intelligence information, things that are very important for us to know for our security, to be able to identify the people who'd be the greatest threat, especially to these dropouts, because all the gangs have, as part of their rules, that they can't become informants. And so anyone who drops out becomes a target for assault. So it becomes very important during the debriefing process to identify all the people that person knows to be affiliated with the gang, so we can keep that person away. So to identify enemies. Another purpose is for us to recognize our own security issues. In fact, when a person starts the process, the debriefing process, our initial interview involves some very important security questions. And that is, are you aware of any escape plans? Are you aware of any contraband or weapons, dangerous contraband that's out there? Are you aware of any person who is targeted to be killed or assaulted? So these are things that need our attention right away. And I will tell you that during the debrief process, it was a debriefer who helped us uncover a major construction flaw at Pelican Bay State Prison. When Pelican Bay was built and opened up in 1989, it was supposed to be the most secure prison in the entire nation at that time. But the walls were prefab walls, and they were just joined together, and then grout was put in for the joints. And a debriefer told us, hey, you need to be aware that they are removing the grout, and that's hollow in there, and they're hiding weapons and contraband inside the walls, and they're making weapons to kill people. And anyway, we went to an Aryan Brotherhood cell that debriefer had mentioned, and sure enough, we uncovered all these weapons and metal. He also mentioned Mexican Mafia members who were doing that. We went to those cells, got more contraband and weapons. Because of that information, the Department of Corrections went back to the people who built the prison, and they had to come in, and it was very costly. They had to redo all the joints, fill in all those joints of those cells, and then reseal all those joints. So that's another purpose for the debrief, is to be able to identify those kind of situations that could be a major security concern.
Adding to what Devin said, that, we gain so much intelligence. And one of the initial critical questions is, where are the guns and drugs and fugitives on the street? Where are the safe houses? Where's the bank? And where are those weapons and contraband inside the institution? And then we would share that information with outside agencies, where we would tell them that there's a safe house in your jurisdiction, or there's a house with a parolee living there, and he's stockpiling weapons or what have you. So that gave us a lot of goodwill. And of course, we'd send out some staff to work with those agencies in terms of searching the place. But I also looked at, when I read these, I looked from a policy decision, what changes do we need to make in our policies to tighten things up, and always thinking about the safety and security of the institution. We just learn so much from these things. And when some of these critical questions were answered, I used to ask the IGIs and the debriefers, call me direct. Don't let it sit on somebody's desk. Call me direct. I want to be first to know, not last to know. And, we'll let you guys make those referrals to the other agencies. But, I want to know. And we really had a good system between the debriefers gathering information, sharing it with our agents that work the street and with local police. So it's a powerful tool. When somebody wants to leave a gang, they usually have so much information that is still relevant to what's going on today. So it was very important, particularly those 6 first critical questions.
And just to add to that, also because of debriefs, search warrants are obtained, people are arrested, major prosecutions are put together based on information we gather from debriefs, and even some of those debriefers end up becoming key witnesses for some of those cases, including RICO cases.
And that leads me into my next set of questions here. How does the debriefing take place? Once they decide to drop out and debrief, how long does it take to set up the debrief? And where and what kinds of questions do you ask? And I think you guys touched on a few of them. And who determines the questions asked during the debriefing? And does the debrief go on for days at times?
Why don't you take to start that, Devin, and then I can talk about some of the questions and question development.
Well, like Brian said earlier, the debrief process has changed. We didn't have a policy that told how to do a debrief or what questions to ask or things to protect the person who's debriefing. We didn't have any of that before until Brian became the assistant director, and then policy became more clear, and he could talk about that. But I will tell you that there is no given time to complete a debrief. I'll tell you that at one time at Pelican Bay, we had so many people wanting to debrief, we were overwhelmed. In the gang unit, we were trying to deal with major cases. We're dealing with gang validations, trying to identify any threats. And then on the side, we're also trying to get all these debriefs done. Well, we had so many people going through it that other investigators had to be assigned. And then SSU, Brian's office, ended up putting together a debrief task force to come in and help us with the huge backlog we had of people wanting to debrief. So it really depends on the person's knowledge for how long it takes to do a debrief. If the person was in a leadership position, it's going to take a little bit longer because their knowledge is more expansive. Also, we have to do an investigation to make sure that that information is credible, or to identify if it isn't credible. We have to determine if this person's telling the truth and if the information's reliable. And that involves a lot of investigation. In the early days, there wasn't much to a debrief. As time went on, it became very involved. When we say that the person provided information corroborated by other sources, we started to actually list what sources corroborated that information. We had to become better investigators so that anyone reading the report would understand how we came to our decision and how we came to those identifications. When a person mentions Flacco from 18th Street, do you know how many Flaccos from 18th Street there could be? We have to get a lot of information to determine that we have the right person, that guy is referencing. And that involves investigation. So it really depends on, time just depends on how long that investigation will take.
We had one investigation of a Black Guerrilla family leader who dropped out. That report was about 700 pages long. Okay, so it like Devin says, it depends how long they were in, and what was their status within the gang. How much did they know? But our questions we constantly evolved. We wanted to know, why did the guy want to drop out? What prompted his decisions? Because one of the things you want to know is, when you're talking to an inmate gang member who may be leaning towards dropping out, you want to gain the psychological edge. So you want to, you're listening to his phone calls, you're reading his mail, and you want to know, why did other gang members drop out? And you want to pepper or include those in your questions, in your daily contacts with this guy, to drop it in there that, hey, I know your family can't visit. I know your family's important to you. Kind of put it in their head, place it in their heads. The decision making in the gang. Who makes the decisions? Okay, who sponsored them into the gang? What did they have to do to get into the gang? The history as they know it. Acts committed to earn membership. Tattoos, signs, symbols, graffiti, codes, very, very important. The Nostra Familia and the Aryan Brotherhood had codes that the cryptanalysis unit of the FBI couldn't break. And they were breaking ISIS codes regularly, but they couldn't break an AB and an NF code until we had a dropout come forward and give up the information. So their codes are incredibly sophisticated. We have them describe, weapons and contraband. How did they make weapons? Where did they hide them? Community-owned businesses. Did they have fronts out there where they were laundering money through different businesses? Their assets and financial matters. Where's the central bank? Who controls it? Okay, because we'd love to hit those places and get their money. So I mean, questions, or we have a set of questions, and we refine them over the years based on the information from the guys doing the debriefings and the information that we were getting. Sometimes we'd ask, hey, is there something we failed to ask you that we should ask you? And sometimes these guys would come up with something we never thought of. So it's an incredible evolving process that has only gotten better over time.
Go ahead, Big Sean.
That was my last question. It's Benny's.
The question, let me see.
Number 7.
Okay, so Brian and Devin, it's a question for both of you guys again. Now, how do we know they're telling us the truth?
Yes.
How do you make that decision, you yourself, as the investigator, the person conducting that debrief? And is a polygraph used? And also, I heard that individuals are admonished, in other words, to get the Miranda warning. If it is used, what's the purpose of reading Miranda?
Devin, I'll leave Miranda to you, and then I'll
Polygraph
in terms of knowing if they're telling the truth, that's where the corroboration comes in. We don't take anything as gospel. It's got to be corroborated and sourced. And because, I used to, in our training, we trained guys to say, you do this investigation, whether it's a validation or a debriefing, as if you're going to be sitting in front of in a courtroom, testifying in court to a jury. It's got to be tight. Okay, so corroboration is very, very important. And if it's not corroborated, it has to be stated in the report that statement could not be corroborated. Okay, now polygraphs, I was a polygraph examiner. I didn't like being a polygraph examiner. They sent me to school. School was 10 weeks, 6 days a week, 2 nights a week. Takes you off the streets for too long. But we had so many polygraph examiners that at that time, the law or the policies within the state was you had to have 200 done within a certain period of time. We knew we couldn't do that. We had 8 of 21 of us were already polygraph examiners. So they said, we'll start polygraphing dropouts to see if they're telling the truth. Bad decision. Very bad decision. I polygraphed a couple of dropouts. One of them, the story is, he was an AB member. He got stabbed. And so he had to drop out. They tried to kill him. and he still couldn't pass the polygraph. And when I talked to him, he said, "Hey, look, I have to drop out. I know that, but I'm still a gang member in my head. When you polygraph a guy for an assault, that's a physical act that requires your body to move. You stab somebody. Did you stab so and so? I mean, the polygraph really reacts to that person. But dropouts, it's in their head. And sometimes if you polygraph them too soon, they're not going to be able to pass it because they still think they're a gang member. They still want to be a gang member. They don't want to be assaulted. So the whole idea of polygraph and dropouts was all for the wrong reasons. And we discovered it after about a year. And so we dropped that requirement. Okay. Why don't you handle the Miranda? Because that's an important issue here, Devin.
Okay. Well, first of all, when we do the debrief, we talk about activities that they've done, stabbings that they've committed. They may have even done a homicide, and they may not have been prosecuted for it. So there's usually some concern by the person going through the process. Am I going to get prosecuted based on what I tell you, what I confess, or about my knowledge that I have? And the answer is no. The purpose of debrief is not to gather information to use against them in a court of law, but rather to determine their sincerity at getting away, to be able to provide information that we can investigate and corroborate and find reliable or not. But we do not read the Miranda warning. However, if during the interview, let's say the guy starts talking about a murder that he committed, at that time we could stop the interview for the discussion and say, look, in regards to this particular murder, I need to let you know that you have the right to remain silent, and that anything that you talk about this murder may get used against you in a court of law. Knowing that, do you still want to discuss it? And then the person can make the decision if they want to go through and continue to talk about it. Let's say they say, no, I don't wish to talk about it anymore. We say, okay, set that aside. Let's continue with the debrief on everything else. That will not be held against them in determining his sincerity at becoming a dropout. And we have to be able to understand that completely as an investigator, that they do have rights and we can't violate those rights.
Hey, Devin and Brian, we have a question from one of our listeners, Seamus Donahue. It says, my understanding is that the debriefing process involves writing an autobiography and number two, getting polygraphed about what they wrote. Is that true?
Writing an autobiography, yes. The polygraph it was at one time, but like I said earlier, that we don't do that anymore.
And if I could mention about the writing of the autobiography, that's mostly to help the investigator. Those become the notes to prepare the report. Once the report is completed, the report is gone over with the prisoner who's going through that process to make sure that as we put it into our report format, that we haven't lost in translation what the prisoner was saying. There's no reason to keep what the prisoner has written. That's just to assist the investigator in the process. Some people do keep the written work. I did not. I got rid of the written material afterwards because that was used as my notes to prepare the report.
Perfect. Go ahead, Big Chalo.
Big Chalo's in the house.
Chief Chalo.
Chief Chalo, Chief Jefe. Hey, so this is for both of you guys, gentlemen. I'm sorry. Based on your experiences and when interviewing these mentally intensely, what do gang dropouts experience when leaving the gang and debriefing? That's one question. This is three questions in one. And if you want to, we can go back. It says, and what kinds of psychological issues do some of them go through, and what is their mindset? So the first one is, what did they experience when they actually drop out and they debrief? What's and they're leaving the gang life. What do you guys experience? Where did you guys see these guys go through?
You want to go first, Devin?
Sure. Of course, we aren't inside their head, but everything that we have knowledge of this area is based on what they disclose to us. It is very difficult for them to go through this process. Imagine belonging to a gang where you're told an informant needs to be assaulted or killed. When you're told that your loyalty is expected or you're considered unworthy. So all these things are in their head. In fact, many of them have had people assaulted for those reasons. And now here they are in the same situation, and they have to come to grips that they are talking to law enforcement and that they are providing information. That is a very difficult thing to have to, I guess, come to a decision. And yet they've been deceived by the gang, by the whole gang life. It's all a deception. It's a lie. And it's a matter of trying to get them into a different mindset. We mostly try to move them away from the gang members and into an area where there are other people going through the same thing. They become a support group to one another. They talk to one another and say, you know, this process, this is okay. And then we have the responsibility of putting them in places where they will be kept safe. But for some of them, it's something that they will have to deal with their entire lives. And I know in the case of one particular Aryan Brotherhood member, he ended up committing suicide. It was very difficult for him that he dropped out and then ended up being placed in a yard around people that were like the ones that he had killed. So it's really up to the individual. But I also hear from most of them, they're glad that they made that decision. And it's been a relief to them. They feel like they're more in charge.
We used to have this program at Pelican Bay called a Transitional Housing Unit, and dropouts would go through there, and they'd be, you know, sitting around with other gang, you know, opposing gang members at one time. And I went to Pelican Bay at least once a month and on business, but I always stopped in at THU, and I'd sit down and talk to these guys, and you know, they would tell me they were really some were ambivalent at first. They said, because now I turned on these guys, and I hated people who ratted, who were snitches, and now I'm one. Okay. And so, you know, they have to work through that in their head of why they wanted out and what was more important, to either lead their own life or be led by the gang. And some of these guys, you know, had been in the gang a long time, and they struggled with it. And you know, initially they may have regretted it, but in the long run, like Devin said, you know, as they were getting ready to transition out of the THU unit, you know, they said it was the best decision they made. Their families were happier. You know, they felt like they were now in control of their life, and we have an obligation to keep them safe and to follow through on promises we made when they decided they were going to debrief. So it's a heavy process that these guys go through, and THU was a really interesting program. It was a great program started by a warden up there, and we were able to see these guys interact with one another. See an NLR guy sitting with an NF guy, or an AB guy sitting with a BGF guy. I mean, it was pretty interesting. At times they would be attacking one another, assaulting one another on site, and now here they were, you know, sitting around talking together and spending every day together. So interesting process.
Can I mentioned something about that THU? I had an opportunity to be part of the initial part of that. But I'll tell you what, that program was put together by people who worked in education and vocation. And they came to us and said, we want to do this program. And it was a great program. Being able to have them adjust before going to a general population. A lot of these guys had been in segregation a lot of years, and they'd been taught to hate people simply because of where they were from or what color their skin was. But I'll tell you what, that transitional housing unit, when they went over there were even enemies, Mexican mafia and Nuestra Familia, who became cellmates and friends. Once they got away from all that prejudice, all that hatred, it actually turned out to be a pretty good program.
You know, I remember one guy telling me in the THU, he said, I was so accustomed to leaving my cell with cuffs. I was always handcuffed. And he said, when I got to THU, I didn't have handcuffs on. I didn't know what to do with my hands. The last 20 years, I had handcuffs on it when I left the cell. I'm standing around. I don't know what to do with my hands. Excuse me. So he said, what do you do with your hands? So it was pretty interesting. Let me get some water here.
Hey,
And
There's a question there or a comment by Bob Ayers.
actually, he was your former warden, right, at
He
Pelican Bay?
was a great warden. And of course, Brian knows him very well as well. Bob Ayers had worked at San Quentin, where Smokey Thomas was the gang lieutenant back in the 80s. When I first went into gangs, he was just finishing up from working there. And he did a lot of great debriefs. Some of the early debriefs of Mexican Mafia, Aryan Brotherhood. A great guy. I have a lot of respect for that man. And in fact, his wife worked for a special service unit.
Yes, she did.
Carol.
Smokey was one of the first. He was like just a bunch of guys that I think we identified 6 gang investigators in the state, and we formed this program called the Criminal Activities Coordinator, and Smokey was one of them. And yeah, Smokey's the legend, really, and his wife was a great lady, worked for us as well. So, and you're going to have Bob Ayers on here late November.
Yes, as a matter of fact, Benny, do you have the date when Warden Aaron's going to be on with us?
I'll let you guys know.
I think it's November 28th, but I'm not sure. But I got to tell you, that guy was probably the most experienced warden CDC ever had. He was a warden of, I think, 7 different institutions. So when he gets on, you're going to enjoy this guy.
Oh, it's going to be. You're the one that gave us his number.
Hey,
Yeah,
so
you're the one that gave us his number, Brian. Thank you.
Hey,
Go ahead.
Brian or Devin, do any of you guys have written down somewhere the timeline of SSU, how it started? Who were your beginning guys? Who came after them? Like a hierarchy type of stuff. It started with this guy, then this guy inherited it, or this person inherited. This person was this, and then just like a timeline just going down. Have you guys ever sat down and written all that stuff down?
I have it.
I mean, because you guys have it in your brain, but what happens, once you guys go to a better place, and if it's not documented, we won't know.
It's been documented in a couple of articles. Started in 1964, based on a program in the New York Department of Corrections, and we started with six people, and then it grew from there. And so yeah, I have a list of everybody that was in the unit, when they got in, when they left, up until about 2007 or 8, and then I kind of I kind of lost track of guys coming and going, but I have a whole list of everybody that's been there. We tried to have a reunion years ago, but everybody was kind of scattered to the winds.
Yeah. Hey, so let's go back to our question. So what kinds of psychological issues do some of these guys go through?
Ambivalence, I think we touched upon it in the last question, that initially regretting it, fear, becoming something that they hated. They got to work through a lot of things inside their head when they step away from that gang.
I'll tell you something else that we haven't really discussed, and that is the effect on their families. And I've seen where people decide to drop out and they say, I need to let my family know that I'm going through this process. And they'll make that phone call and talk, and the family says, what have you done to us? What have you, I mean, are we threatened now? Are we going to get hit? You know, and a lot of concerns there. And then there are others who are very supportive. Um, One mother talked to me on the phone and said, "Thank you so much for helping my son. We are so happy to have him back." And she discussed how when he was a teenager in high school, how he got affected by peers, and that's what got him into the gang life and into drugs. And now she was extremely happy because he was getting away from that and he had turned more towards his family, and they felt like their son was finally coming home.
Sometimes years later, during a visit where they could actually hug their mother or their loved one or their kids for the first time in 20 years, has a big impact, really big impact.
Hey guys, before we get to Sean's next question, question from Jerónimo de los Cielos. Did you ever have the scenario where someone wanted to debrief and did not get the chance due to being hit or stuck in the yard?
No, not that I'm aware of.
I don't remember that happening.
Okay. Go ahead, Big Sean.
Hey guys, based on your experience in interviewing these guys, on that first day, are they moved to another cell? And if you can, without giving up any security procedures, how do the guards? What procedure do the guards use to move them around?
Well, as far as moving to another place, that all depends on what environment the person's in. If they are surrounded by gang members who could become a threat to them, then it would be necessary to make that move. At Pelican Bay, we actually created several sections in one of the housing units to place those going through the debrief process. And like I said, when I became a caseworker, I was moved to that unit to keep an eye on them. But also in that same housing unit, we had all the leadership of the NF, the top generals. So SHU was what it was, but we still had 3 sections, and then it expanded to 4 sections. And eventually, I think the whole unit ended up becoming just people going through the debrief process.
Once
So
those
really,
guys are,
it depends on their safety, where they're at.
so let's say, like you use Brian's moniker, Flacco. Let's say Flacco's moved into a different cell or a different area of the prison. Does everybody already? The word is out. Flacco's getting a debrief, or Flacco's giving up info. Is it the information flowing out there like that?
Sometimes.
Yeah, when he's once they're moved, it's why was he moved? Most of these guys put it together.
Hey, Brian, do these guys eventually, as a guard, as a correctional officer walking by, does he tell them, hey, I need to talk to SSU? Do they hand them a note? How does the process usually go? How do they tell the correctional officer that they want to speak with SSU or with the IGI internet or the gang coordinator? How does that process usually? What do they do how do they inform the correctional officer that they want to debrief?
I'll let Devin handle that one.
Usually it's done by a note, or if the prisoner is being escorted for some other reason, maybe to go to the clinic or to the law library, they may pass that information along to the officer who's doing the escort. Um, maybe this is a good place to tell another story because there was a Mexican mafia member who was very active. He had killed a rival gang member. He was serving life without possibility of parole. He was married to a young wife who was very dedicated to him, did not like the gang lifestyle, but she was there to support him and seemed to love him very much. She moved up to Crescent City and she was working there locally. And I had to go do a training in an area where she worked. And I was a little nervous about this because I really didn't want her there where I was going to be talking about gangs. And I specifically had one of the presentations about her husband. When I got there, I was told that she had dismissed herself there, excused herself from being there because she felt like there was a conflict. I appreciated that very much, respected her for it. The person who she was close to told me she really believes she can convince her husband to leave the Mexican mafia. She goes in and she reads the scriptures to him every weekend when she visits, and she really thinks that she can help him make that change. I prejudged him, and I decided there's no way that this guy will ever leave the gang. About 3 weeks later, I got a note from him, and he says, "I want out." And I brought him in. I said, "What's going on? Why are you looking to get out?" And he says, "My wife. She's a very good woman. We read the scriptures, and I'm convinced that this is the way that I should go. I don't want to be part of this anymore. I want to be with my family." And he seemed very sincere about his religious awakening and his desire to live a different life. And he went through that process, and it wasn't easy. And he did a lot of stuff to prove that he was really done with it. And I learned a lesson not to ever prejudge these guys for what they're capable of doing. So again, through a note, we were notified, and he went through that process, and I was much happier because of it. And my hat's off to his wife, who really helped him get away from that.
Guys, before we get to Benny's question, we have a question from Mazood B. Welcome to the show. How are dropouts protected once they go into PC? Guess he heard a comment from Mundo mention that he was placed in a pod with active MM members a few weeks after dropping out.
You want to take that one, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, they're protected in PC. I mean, basically they're in protective custody, so they're not going to be around somebody. When the staff are not going to let this guy mingle with anybody that's going to assault them. As far as Mundo being put in they may not have known that he dropped out. I don't know the details of that. I had requests sometimes when I was the assistant director about, somebody wanting to drop out and the staff wanting to allow him to stay in a particular location to gather information. That always made me nervous. And the warden and I would talk about it. And, to me, that's a warden's decision, because they're the ones they're the boots on the ground. They make the difficult decisions. But when I was in on those conversations, it made me very nervous to leave somebody around other gang members when they decided to drop out, because you just don't know. Loose lips sink ships. People get hurt. When somebody raises their hand and says they want to drop out, first thing we got to do is protect them. And I don't know the situation with Mundo, so I don't know exactly what happened there, but that would have made me very nervous.
Hey, Benny, before we get to your question, let me just ask one more from Seamus Donahue. What percentage of debriefers were found to be dishonest?
It happens once in a while. It's not very often. I don't know of a percentage. Um, More than finding those that are dishonest, I would find a couple of them that went through that process and then pulled out at the last minute and said, I don't want to do this. And the information I gave you was wrong, but it's already been investigated and it was proven right. But they decided that they didn't really want to go through it and they wanted to go back and continue to be a gang member. That happened more often than someone coming in and being deemed unreliable or dishonest. Again, it does happen. There are people who start the debriefing process sometimes just to try to get close to a dropout. We usually were able to figure that out ahead of time, and the person was rejected and sent back in.
Yeah, Devin's right. The percentage is low, but we were always concerned with what we called a sleeper, somebody who's going to go through the process in order to get close to a dropout and kill them. We call them sleepers, and so we were, staff were very cognizant of that. And Devin was right. We had a couple of high-profile. I know at least 2 AB members that were high-profile that started the process and then stopped, but they had gone too far. Now we had a decision to make in terms of protecting them, because who knew that they started the process, and would these guys get stabbed, and would the department would be liable for it? So a lot of these guys ended up getting locked up anyway, because we couldn't let them back. We couldn't put them back in shoe with the other gang members after they started the process. So we got sued behind that a couple of times. So those are the kind of the difficult decisions that occur, with people dropping out and the gang management business. When you get Bob Ayers on in a couple of weeks, he can speak to that. He's had to make a lot of very difficult decisions up at Pelican Bay and CSP SAC and some level 4 places he worked. So he'd be the guy that could really answer that question.
Wow. All right, Benny, you're next.
That's a very interesting topic. I mean, I'd love to hear more about this, man. And not only that, Brian and Devin, going back to the original question, how can you describe the procedure that the guards use when they're escorting the guy out of his cell? He's going from a hardcore cell to a admin or whatever he's at, and he's been moved to a softer cell or a cell that's not as high security. I mean, do they shut down the housing unit? I mean, what procedure is taken there? Additionally, I want to go into question number 10. Did those individuals ever talk to either one of you guys? And it's kind of the same thing we talked about.
That's not something that we would usually discuss about. That's kind of a I don't know how to put it, but it's something that we do tactically.
Right.
That probably should not really be talked about too much, about how people are brought out or where they're taken to do the interview. Just know that a request can be made in many different ways, and we find a way to be able to talk to that individual in some location.
Okay. Well, my question pretty much led to what you already talked about, which was, have you guys ever talked to anybody about having regrets about, their first days or the weeks later, having a regret of debriefing and saying, "Hey, I don't want the PC. I don't want to be here. I want to go back to my old lifestyle." I guess you guys already touched based on that,
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's a lot of regret, and there's ambivalence. They're going down a path that they never thought they'd ever be down. And Devin hit it earlier about in terms of the threat to their families. And, so those are really, really difficult decisions. And these guys go through a lot of psychological changes when they drop. If they've been in a gang long enough, you got to figure they're all state raised, right? They started in juvenile hall, they went to the youth authority, they went to adult probation, and went to the county jail, and then to state prison. They're state raised. This is their life, and now they're changing it. And what we feel is for the good, and most of them believed it was for the good, after they got comfortable being out of the gang. So, yeah.
I'll tell you also that law enforcement can also help make or break some of those processes. We actually have officers who will use words like snitch and rat. And those are not words that we use for people who decide to get away from this. But the gang members use that. And when law enforcement reverts to using that same terminology, it really takes away from professionalism and our mission of trying to help people get away from this kind of lifestyle. So my encouragement would be that all law enforcement refrain from using those terms of rat or snitch because they have a negative connotation.
Another problem is if they have a parole date, and where are they going to parole to? 99% of people parole right back to their neighborhood, right? They can't do that. And we were the largest prison and parole system in the free world for a while there, and we had policies that worked against us. I can remember at THU talking to an NF guy who owed restitution as part of his sentence, and he had a parole plan to go to New Mexico, and by policy they wouldn't let him go to New Mexico because he still had restitution to pay, so you couldn't leave the state. And so he had no other option other than going right back to his neighborhood where he's going to get killed. And I tried like crazy to get that policy changed. I said, it's, he can pay restitution from out of state. Chances are he'd be better off getting a job out of state than he's not going to get it in his old hood. So we had policies that worked against us. And this is, part of the debriefing, we learned about these things. We had policies that were hurting us, not helping us. And you try to get those changed.
Hey guys, before we get to our last question, we have the prison guard. Welcome once again, Hector, to the show. PCing up isn't looked down upon as it once was. Everyone is familiar with the treacherous politics in the lifestyle, favoritism, addiction, bully tactics, smut campaign, etc.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Times have changed.
Yeah.
Hey, so you guys brought something up. When police officers out in the street and stuff like that, they call them snitches and rats and stuff like that. And I remember correcting some of our officers when I used to tell them, hey, this guy became a confidential source for us, and he's giving us some good good intel. I said, why are you calling him a snitch? I said, don't call these people snitches, rats. I used to piss the crap out of me because our shadiest officers were the biggest violators. I mean, these are the guys that I would, if I could have, fired on the spot, I would have fired them. But they had the AB 301 that protects these guys. Anyways, you know where I stand behind police corruption and miss what do you call it? They don't follow the rules. My dog wants to go. Anyway, so last question. Here it is. I mean, this is kind of a loaded question, but we'll go through. You guys have probably answered some of these questions and brought it up before. But what happens to a dropout after debriefing is number one. What was it like for them to land in a soft yard, and then after going from a high security yard to a soft yard, did they experience any regrets? And I mean, there's like 5 questions in this one, so you guys want to take a jab at
Go
that?
ahead, Brian. You are more involved in those placements afterwards.
Yeah, difficult. Difficult decisions being made by wardens and managers, and where once they're debriefed and they've gone through THU, it's where do they go next? Do they go out to an SNY soft yard? Can this guy survive in any other type setting? Unfortunately, those sensitive needs yards had child molesters on them and people who were in trouble. And a lot of gang members still had this self-pride that, they were a convict. And now all of a sudden they're on a yard with a bunch of child molesters. It caused problems. And we tried to place them in a place, number one, where they'd be safe. And then you know what happened in time on the sensitive needs yards is we had dropout gangs form. Okay. And now there's probably Bravo could probably tell us how many there are now. I remember one time there was 15 or 20 dropout gangs. So sometimes the gang mentality doesn't leave. And these guys start out as pressure groups, and then they become a full-blown gang, and then take on the gang that they dropped out from. Dropped out from. But difficult decisions to make, and these people go through head trips. I think Devin mentioned one AB member committed suicide. He didn't want to be there. He had had enough. So, part of this is, when you become a gang member, you take on a responsibility for that gang, and it's all wrong, and you commit some pretty violent crimes, and this is all part of payback. I hate to say it, but for every action there's a reaction. And you're not just blessed and said, okay, go away and be good. Now you got to live with your decision. And particularly if you're still an inmate, you live in that environment, and prisons are toxic. And, there's a lot of violence just simmering below just below, and then it pops out. So, they pay for that lifestyle in more than one way. And part of it is that whole transition to being a non-gang member. But I think Devin and I both touched upon it. The ones that we've known are glad they dropped out. The vast majority are glad that they're in control of their own lives. So,
Hey, so real quick, like a lot of some of the audience people don't know what THU and SNY mean. Can you guys just let's close it up with that, unless you guys have another question?
THU was the transitional housing unit where dropouts went, and they mingled with opposing gang members, and they were there for a period of time before they were moved to another location. Sensitive needs yards, you want to take that one, Devin?
Sensitive needs yards are facilities at different institutions, different levels of security that are established for placing inmates who would be in trouble with gang members or other people. They become alternate placements for them. David Contreras and I worked at the California Men's Colony. That was a prison designated for dropouts. At least part of the prison was. And there are other prisons who have yards, or rather facilities, that are designated for people who have trouble with other prisoners who would be killed or assaulted. So that's a sensitive needs yard.
A guy that owes drug money, he's in a drug debt, he may end up on a sensitive needs yard. So, I mean, after a while, I was already gone. I was already retired, but the sensitive needs yards grew in numbers way beyond what we ever expected. Probably 30,000, out on sensitive needs yards scattered around the state. So that was a policy. I don't know if it, where it is today. Some of those yards became programming yards. Other ones didn't. I'm not up to date with where the department is on the SNY yards anymore.
And there was another type of yard, and that was the protective housing unit.
Yes.
And that was for the real top people that really needed protection, not necessarily gang related. You had people like Sirhan, who was in the protective housing unit, and Charles Manson, and people who probably would not get along in other facilities just because of things that they've done.
Hey, David and Brian, last question. Now in the sensitive needs yards, we're seeing a lot of these dropouts from the Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, Aryan Brotherhood, Black Guerrilla Family. they're now, we have the 25ers. Can you explain, they're now becoming a prison gang themselves or disruptive group once they drop out in the sensitive needs? Is that true? Is that happening right now in the state of California, in the
Yeah,
California
Brian,
Department
you
of
could.
Corrections?
You
Well,
started to talk about that a little bit. You
yeah,
want to?
the 2 5s, if my memory serves me correct, were Mexican mafia dropouts that formed their own gang again. And if I remember, they started out as a pressure group, pressuring other inmates for a canteen and what have you, and then became a full blown gang. And we that whole phenomenon of dropout gangs continued to grow. The NF had, was it Devin? Was it the New Flowers or
Flowers, yeah.
and Northern Riders? There was a host of these guys that formed a second gang, and so I mean, you talk about managing a large prison system with at that time 175,000 inmates, 125,000 people on parole, 70% recidivism rate, constant people moving and going, moving 20,000 people a month on the buses. These are the decisions that who would have expected dropouts to form another gang and now become violent. I mean, it's an incredible business to be in because there's no day ever the same because there's something different going on. And these inmates, now with smuggled cell phones, forget it. Things are changing very, very rapidly. And so, yeah, there's all kinds of dropout gangs.
And I
And
think
just
our
to tell
last
you what
question,
2.5 is, 2.5
Peseta.
represented a piece of eight. A piece of eight. What was called a peseta in
Peseta,
Spain. And peseta is another word that they give for someone who's protective custody, PC. And that's where that came from, was 2.5.
guys, the last
Real quick,
question.
like, so one experience that I had was 3 years before when I had just become chief. One of the guys brought a guy in and he had a 25 and he says, have you ever seen this gang before? I said, yeah, he's a peseta. So my new guy goes, what do you mean? He goes, yeah, it means that he probably debriefed. He was probably in a little special cell or something, and they formed their own gang now. And
Yes.
the guy told us that he was kind enough to tell us, kind of give us a little bit of a, since he was talking to the chief at the time, the guy said, well, I can school the chief and tell him what's going on. But he told us, I mean, he's part of a peseta. There's a bunch of them, he said. And I said, how loyal were they to each other? And he just stayed quiet after that. He didn't say anything. So I guess once you snitch or you become you get debriefed or not snitched, it's easier to keep on telling the officers, right, what's going on.
Well, I'll tell you also, I know of a Mexican mafia member that I debriefed, and he ended up going out on parole. When he got out there, he decided he wanted to still have all that influence. He was trafficking narcotics. He was trying to run a gang, and they killed him.
Wow.
So his survival rate would have been much greater had he just left it alone.
Hey guys, we're running out of time, but we have 3 more questions, but we're only going to answer this question because we're running out of time. From B Bones, can you drop out of an SNY gang?
I guess so. I mean, I don't know, Devin. Do you know?
Well, I imagine if someone from 2.5 or New Flowers wanted to drop out, they could do that. We talk about prison gangs like the AB, the ME, the NF, the Texas Syndicate, all these because at the time it affected their housing. By policy, we were required to put all members and associates in segregated housing. Times have changed, but back when we were working, that was the policy. And so when we talk about debriefs and dropouts, our focus was on those prison gangs specifically. Now, if a person ended up going and starting another new prison gang, if that one ended up getting designated as a prison gang, their members would end up going into segregated housing, and then it would be required for them to go through the debrief process to drop out.
I have one last question. Are pesetas and these new flowers, are they designated as prison gangs or prison disruptive groups?
I don't think they were designated either way.
Either
No.
way?
No.
Perfect. Hey guys, once again, man, I said at the beginning of the show that I believe this is the first time you both have been on camera on a podcast. Was I correct or was I making it up?
First time together, yes.
First
I
time
think
together,
so.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we made history today. We
Yeah.
made history. Wow, we made history. Hey guys, thank you, Brian and Devin. Thank you very much. We are honored to have you with us, and we hope that we know, not hope, we know this isn't the last time. With that said, Chalo, anything more for our guest?
Other than thank you for, I mean, you're never too old to learn. Even though we're out of the business and we like to learn, we always teaching us. I enjoy hearing you guys give us, everything, all the information, all this class you gave us. I mean,
Wow,
you guys are awesome.
Benny,
Thank you
any
for
last
having
words?
This is better than going to a conference.
Oh,
We got it from
Don't
without a
say
doubt,
that.
and it's free.
We got
It's
we
free.
got it from.
Benny,
got
don't
it.
say it too loud, or else your wife ain't gonna let you go out to conferences anymore.
I mean, we heard it from the two top dogs, man. The guys at their best, best of the business.
Exactly.
guys.
Big Sean, any last?
Exactly what Chalo stole my thunder, man. Exactly. I learned quite a bit listening to you guys. You guys are just a wealth of information.
Guys, thank you very much from the bottom of our hearts. And you know what? Like Benny said, you know what's better than going to a conference. We were honored, and we're honored to have you with us. Any last words, Brian?
Just thanks for having us. I hope your viewers and listeners learn something. And thanks for having us.
Thank you, brother. Devin?
Ditto. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys. And God bless you and be safe out there. God bless you
Okay.
guys.
All right.
Wow. I'm telling you, man, these guys are legends. I mean, they're my heroes. I mean, I came up working with Devin. I never worked with Brian, but I'm telling you, man, what an honor to have these guys. Really, it's awesome. And I can't wait for Robert Ayers to come on.
Yeah.
Man,
And David, and like that's why I brought it up. As talk about doing a timeline with everything, because once God takes these guys, I mean, unless it's in somewhere written, right? I mean, you're losing all kinds of history.
Well, you know who's going to be able to answer a lot of those questions? Robert Ayers.
Okay.
The warden, he's going to be able to answer a lot of those questions. With
Yes.
that said, Benny, tell us about next week's, not next week, it's Thursday's guest. Finally, if the devil doesn't get in the way, tell us about Thursday's
Chamuco.
guest.
I'm telling you, I saw Robert a couple of weeks ago, and we were just laughing. I thought, dude, something about you, man. You got that dark cloud following you. So anyway, he's coming on this coming Thursday in 2 days. Robert is a retired El Paso Police Department. He retired as a deputy chief. He became a U.S. Marshal for the Western District of Texas. After serving 6 years, he retired. And now he's an expert on Mexican cartels and the occult. Robert has appeared in so many media outlets to talk about these two topics. World expert. I mean, he travels all over the world. For those who haven't seen his presentations, or for those that have seen his presentations, you know what I'm talking about, man. Don't miss it. He's a dynamic speaker and a great presenter. He's not going to disappoint. Don't miss it, man. It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be outstanding. With that said, guys, we're an hour and 24 minutes. We broke a record, 2 records tonight. We had the 2 legends, and we went past our 1 hour. Chalo, finish off. Go ahead.
Just real quick, like I should have done a shout out, man. Our prayers for Israel. I mean, our
Yes.
brothers are getting
Yeah.
meet up over there, and we just pray that we know it's in the Bible, bro. It's going to happen, but I mean, I wasn't expecting for them to kill so many innocent kids too at the same time. It really hurts. But prayers for Israel and all the people, for all of us. Like I said, integrity means everything and everything, not just our business, but in every man's life, every person's life. Integrity.
Benny?
I'm not going to give you the regular one. I'm changing it up a little bit today. Just watch what's going on in Israel. Like Chalo said, what does our future hold for us? Be prepared to fight. Be ready, man.
Don't give up your guns, guys. I'm telling you, don't give up your guns.
Load up. Big Sean?
Exactly what both Chalo and Benny said. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen here.
They're here.
Stand by. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of where and
Yep.
when it's going to happen here.
Yep.
It's already been set in motion. Trust me. So
Yes.
just be safe and, lock and load.
And guys, always remember, live a purpose-driven life. I mean, if you don't know what that means, send me a text. Live every day like it's your last day on earth, and you don't need a badge, you don't need a uniform to make a difference, to continue saving lives. Live a purpose-driven life and live every day like it's your last. With that said, thank you for watching. We'll see you this Thursday live on our show, and God bless you.
Bendy.
The town I live in is lonely. It gets so lonely till I have to cry. I told my mother why I was through. I told her just what I